London broil is a favorite thing for a lot of people to sous vide. It's inexpensive, it's pretty flavorful most of the time, and it also is very good when it's sous vide because you can tenderize it a little bit. We're going to dive into everything about sous vide London broil coming up next on Amazing Food Made Easy. Hey there, I'm Jason Logston from Amazing Food Made Easy and president of the International Sous Vide Association. Today I'm diving into all things London broil. But first, why sous vide London broil? What's the point of using sous vide versus some of the traditional methods? Because after all, London broil is more of a preparation than a actual cut. There's actually lots of different cuts that a London broil can be. It's usually a chuck steak, a flank steak, or a round steak. And all of those have one thing in common. They're pretty tough. We're used to having flank steaks maybe that you just grill and you slice thinly against the grain, and that's a great way to prepare them and get around that toughness, but they can benefit from long cook times, just like a chuck steak or a round steak can. And so that's one of the things about London broil and sous vide. As it is a tough cut, you can cook it for a long period of time and it's going to tenderize it. So you can cook a London broil at a really low temperature for a long period of time and it's going to tenderize and still be nice and juicy and flavorful. Compared to some traditional methods which raise the internal temperature above medium rare, sometimes up in the well done, pot roasty, braised range. So it's something that really allows you more control over your London broil, which is great. Cooking it longer also allows you to break down the connective tissue, which is great, even at those lower temperatures. And when it's a thicker cut, which a lot of London broils are, it also allows you to heat it through completely evenly. So I love turning to sous vide for it because it's a great way to really prepare something that has a lot of variety in it in general. I've had some London broils that people just threw on the grill and they were tough and I didn't like them. Where sous vide London broil almost always turns out really, really flavorful, tender, and perfectly cooked. Because of all those reasons, I think London broil is a perfect cut for sous vide and it's one of my favorite ways to cook London broil. I really don't cook it any other way now. People want to know where the best places to buy meat are, and there's a lot of different places you can get London broils and other cuts. I always recommend getting to know your local butcher, even if that's just at your grocery store. Costco is also well known for having a lot of good meat. And then if you want something a little more special, you can always turn to some of the online meat purveyors. My favorites are Snake River Farms, Allen Brothers, and Porter Road. They all have amazing quality, and I know a bunch of people that work at them, and they're all great people that really do care about the product they're putting out. So what is the best time and temperature for sous vide London broil? As I said, it can be different cuts, so the time can really depend on which cut you have. If you can look at the packaging and figure out, is it a chuck, is it a round, or is it a flake steak, that will give you a little more information about how long to cook it. But in general, you're looking probably around 18 to 60 hours of cook time, and that's a long range, right? And that's because the flank steak, you can get away with a lot shorter cooking times. That'd be about 18 to 24 hours to really, really tenderize it. For a chuck, you're looking at 24 to 36 hours, and for a round, you're looking at probably 36 to 48 or even up to 60 hours to tenderize it, depending on where it comes from the round. But a good rule of thumb for how long to sous vide a London broil is about 24 hours. That's going to give you a lot of tenderization and should work for the majority of cuts. Some people like to go a lot shorter, and like I said, I've had London broils that have just been thrown on the grill and cooked. So if you're looking for more bite, a little more toughness to your steak, which is good for a lot of steaks, that's why I like flank steak, because it has that bite and that toughness to it, then go ahead and sous vide it for a shorter amount of time. Because of those two different goals, that helps explain why there is no real correct temperature or time for your meat. You have a lot of range, and it really depends what you're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of other resources out there. Kenji from Serious Eats has a lot of good content. Chef Steps does. And when it comes to determining the temperature to sous vide a London broil at, it really comes down to what are you trying to accomplish. There's two main schools. One is a steak-like consistency. For that, you're looking at however you like your steak. So I like medium rare, so I'm looking at 131 to 135. If you want medium, you can go up to 140. The other is if you want something more braise-like, more of a pot roast starting to fall apart. For that, I love 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's the perfect temperature for a pot roast-like texture. But you can also go up to 165 or 176 if you really want to break it down. And again, it's good to know what type of cut you are cooking. Chuck roast is good at all these temperatures. Flank steak's good at the majority of these temperatures. And round really depends on the type of round that it is. So depending what actual cut your London broil is, you might want to pick a different temperature. But if you want steak, stick to the lower temperatures that you would normally cook steak like, and you're looking again at 24 to 36 hours for most of the cuts. And if you're looking more braisey, go up to that 150, 165 range, and then it might cook a little bit faster, but 24 hours is still going to be a pretty good time for you. But my personal recommendation for steak like is 131 for about 24 to 36 hours. If I'm looking for that pot roast texture, I'm going up to about 150, and I'm cooking it for probably about 24 hours. So now I wanted to dive into how do you actually go about sous videing London broil. I want to go through the different steps for you, similar to a lot of meats, but if you're new to sous vide and London broil is one of your first ones, I want to make sure you are set up for success in getting the perfect meat at the end. First, you need to prep it. This is usually removing any large fat deposits, connective tissue. You can add salt or spice rubs to it ahead of time. Some people don't like adding salt or spice rubs. I use a lot of spice rubs and salt, and I think it's good. It's definitely different than if you're, just going to throw it on the grill, but I think it does help flavor the outside of the meat really well and add flavor throughout the entire cooking process. I don't recommend putting butter or oils in the bag. It tends to draw out flavor, and it's better to add butter or oil at the end of the sous vide after you've seared the London broil. A lot of people ask if you can cook London broil from frozen, and the answer is yes. You just want to add a few hours to the cook time. With London broil, we're already talking about such long cook times that you don't have to worry about the specifics, but add an extra 2 hours. You're good to go using it directly from the freezer. There's no need to thaw it. You can just throw it in the sous vide machine if it's already in the package. And that's another point. A lot of times London broils can come pre-packaged. I recommend removing it from the store package and then sealing it on your own with your normal sous vide bags. Not all store packaging is heat safe. Some of them leak. You can just run into issues. Plus, I like to season my meat before I cook it a lot. So I always recommend removing it from the store packaging and putting it in your own. A lot of people also like to marinate London broils, and that's completely fine to do. Just doing it the same way that you normally would. Marinate it first, remove it from the marinade, and then cook it. If you try to marinate at the same time you're sous videing, a lot of times once the meat starts to change texture, the marinade interacts with it differently, and so it's not always going to give you the same results. So once you've prepared the meat, like I said, the simplest way is just to use salt and throw it in a bag, but I also like to use spice rubs a lot. You want to seal it. If you're cooking multiple London broils, make sure they are in a single layer. You don't want them stacked up, or that's going to increase the cook time. And you can use pretty much any sort of sealer, from a food saver edge. Ziploc freezer bags work really good, or a chambered vacuum sealer. I use a VacMaster. My dad uses a Polyscience. They're both really good machines to seal it, but a lot of home cooks that don't need something like that, Ziploc bags or an edge sealer work completely fine. And you just want to get most of the air out. We're not actually pulling a strict vacuum or cooking it in this special environment. We're just getting the air out so the water gets close to the meat when we're cooking it, and that allows heat transfer. So that's why Ziploc bags even work really well if you use the water displacement method. Most of those options are using plastic bags, but there's also silicone bags like the Stasher bags and a few other ones that you can use if you don't like having the plastic against your food, even though most food scientists say the plastic in sous vide is completely safe. It's up to you, and you can use some of those silicone bags if you prefer. Once you have it in the package, it's time to heat up your sous vide machine. You want to set the temperature to whatever final temperature you decided on. Like I said, I like 131 or 150, depending if I'm going for steak-like or braise-like. But set it to whatever you're interested in having your meat be. But set it to whatever the desired doneness you are looking for in your London broil. Some people think for best results, you need to heat up the sous vide machine first. But for a long cook like a London broil, it doesn't really matter. You can throw it in as the machine's heating. There's no need to really wait the 5 to 15 minutes for it to get up to temperature, because it's going to be in there for such a long period of time. You should be good to go. People also always ask me what immersion circulator do I recommend, and the big ones that I always use are Joule, Anova, Polyscience, and Vesta. I respect the companies. I know people that work there, and they take pride in their equipment, so I usually recommend those. There's a lot of other machines out there that are good. I do recommend spending a little bit more to go with a actual company's circulator versus a just inexpensive knockoff, because if something goes wrong with your knockoff, you're not going to be able to get it fixed, which is always disappointing, where companies like Anova and Polyscience will do everything they can to make sure your circulator is back working if something does go wrong with it. Once the London broil has cooked for long enough to be fully tenderized, like I said, that can be anywhere from 4 or 5 hours for some people, up through 60 hours for certain cuts as well. You can then take it out of the sous vide machine. If you're going to be using it right away, we can go on to the searing step. But a lot of people like to use this for food prep. And so you can take the sous vide bag, put it in some cold water or ice water, and then put it in the refrigerator where it's going to last for a few weeks, or put it in the freezer where it'll last for months. And this is a great way to really speed up your food prep for when you actually need dinner, because you can then remove it from the fridge or remove it from the freezer, and it's going to reheat in about an hour, and then you can sear it and you're good to go. And you have like a really quick, flavorful meal that you don't have to worry about it taking 36 hours or 48 hours to cook, because it's already cooked, tenderized, and safe to eat. And so you can just reheat it and enjoy a nice, quick meal. When you are ready to eat, you want to take it out of the plastic bag. You want to dry it off really well. I like to use paper towels, or I keep some dishcloths that on hand that I just use for drying off sous vide meat, so I'm not getting juices on our good dish towels. Then you want to heat some oil in a hot skillet or a cast iron pan. You can also do this on a hot grill. And you want to put the meat on, and you just want to cook it for probably about 30 seconds to 60 seconds per side, flipping it a few times till you get a nice brown crust. You don't want to overcook it. The core temperature is already perfect. You don't want to raise it above what it already is. That's why a lot of times I'll let the meat sit out for 10, 15 minutes while the pan's heating and while I'm getting the rest of the food together. And that helps lower the temperature some, which gives me a longer sear. Some people like to use mayo on the outside of the meat. Some people hate that. Some people swear by it. So that's something you can try to help get a little bit better sear and a little more of a quick sear. And if you're running into issues with smoke, I highly recommend trying to find a high smoke point oil. Some of those are like avocado oil, ghee. Some of the lighter olive oils actually have a pretty high smoke point, but it's worth looking at some online resources to see which ones of those work best, because that means less smoke. You're less likely to set off your smoke alarm, which I've done way too often. Once you have that nice golden brown, crispy crust on the outside, you're ready to serve it. There's lots of different ways to serve London broil. One of my favorite ways is to cut it thinly. Then you can serve it with some roasted vegetables or some rice on the side. There's a lot of different sauces and salsas. You can also add barbecue sauce to it, and it makes a really good kind of like poor man's brisket, if you will. If you want some additional flavor, you can also add spice rubs before you sear it. It's a great way to bump up the flavor at the end. And that's the nuts to bolts of how to actually sous vide a London broil. Hopefully you know everything you need to know now to successfully cook one and wow your friends and family. I'm going to link up my favorite simple sous vide London broil master recipe. It's a recipe that will allow you to perfectly cook your London broil with sous vide every time. It's going to come out moist, tender, ready to rock. You can add your own spices and flavorings, sauces and sides to it, but you can use it as the basis for any meal that you would usually use London broil in. If you have any comments or questions, please drop them below and I'll be happy to get back to them. You can also check out my Exploring Sous Vide Facebook group, where a lot of great people hang out and share information about cooking. That's at afmeasy.com/Facebook. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston.